It's interesting how you want to be remembered.
So I asked the question about what I hope the legacy is.
When thinking about your legacy, what are people going to remember about you, about your operation?
It's been an honor to be part of the Simmental family. And like any family, there is a legacy. And to me, the legacy is so important to continue on.
I hope the legacy for the next generation have the passion for our breed that we have spent a lifetime building.
I'm Barry Bennett. Originally, I was raised in southeast Saskatchewan in a small rural community called Arcola with my family. So I had two brothers, a sister, and my parents. And we raised, it was a typical Saskatchewan mixed farm, cattle and grain. In the the late 60s, we started with, let's see, basic short-term cow herd. And then we introduced four breeds of cattle when the European cattle came in. And they were Simmental, Maine Anjou, Keenan, and Limousin. My brother he became an AI technician. And in those early days, you actually had to be approved by the provincial government to to do that project. So he did a lot of AI in around the community. And two breeds of cattle came to the top. The Simmental cattle and the Maine Anjou cattle came to the top of all our crossbreds. We were in a community down in Saskatchewan where there was very typical, there were smaller turbid breeders in the Hereford and the Angus business who never really got off and started crossbreeding. And this was probably one of the great things that helped the Simmental breed along, because the Simmental breed on top of the British cattle gave us significant gains in on the calving age. Birth weights were somewhat larger, but we learned to adapt with them, and over time that's changed. So as we went through the whole production cycle, um, the cattle we moved up, and we couldn't afford the full blood cattle, so we ended up raising purebred cattle, and our cattle became quite popular in that we'd sold some steers that became champions at the Royal Winter Fair, at Agribition. We had a couple of bulls, one that Bar 5 purchased, and they had championed with him at Agribition. And I had a bull that went down to uh, the National Western Show in Denver, and he was senior bull calf champion. So we went through that for a few years, and then we just kind of graduated back into the commercial industry in that. I graduated from university in '73, did a short stint with Farm Credit, and thereafter that I moved from the Peace River country down to Calgary, and was hired to become the very first fieldman of the Canadian Simmental Association. Jerry Colmeyer he did my interview and hired me in that. And what we did there is we were trying to promote the breed to the commercial guys. So my job was basically traveling throughout Canada, mostly in Western Canada, and touching base with the ranchers, touching base with the breeders, and trying to establish field days where we could demonstrate how these cattle would produce when they were put back on the uh, the domestic cattle, mostly the Hereford cattle and that. So what really happened is that it was more of a trying to get a comfort, a confidence level into to the commercial cattle industry that these cattle would really quite work. So we did that for a couple of years, and then the industry changed, and I left, and then I came back in the 1990s, actually in August of 1990 as the general manager. So you go from the early 70s to the 90s and that, and all the time I was kind of involved with the Simmental breed, but came back as the general manager of the Simmental Association. Our main job there was to ensure that in Canada we have the Animal Pedigree Act, and there can only be one breed association per breed, and you have to operate under the auspices of the federal government. So we had to ensure the purity of the breed, and we met our bylaws and goals, and that still exists today. And that is one of the big challenges the breed has to make. All breeds have to make. So we've gone on, and so that grew from being just pedigrees and performance. We got into international sales and doing, traveling throughout the world, throughout the United States and that. And our cattle were very well accepted. And it was because of the breeders and their dedication and the kinds of cattle they raised that made it so strong. The breed is strong then. And original Simmental imports. The Simmentals came from four countries: Switzerland, France, Germany, Austria. And within each of those countries, the breakdown within within the German breed, you had I guess they brought cattle in from France. In the French breed, you had the Pyrouche, which was Pyrouche was signal, and so they were taller, slender kind of cattle. And the Montbéliards were the more structured, tighter cattle, but a lot more milk to them, and the Abondants. And there was Zazu. There were a really dark red bull in that. You had the Swiss cattle, and as the cattle came in, we kept track of them on our pedigrees. And so take for example, Parisian, when he was imported, he was half Swiss, half French. And if you look at his pedigree, you can go back in and you plug number 1 into the herd book, and you'll see Parisian pop up, and you'll see his sire has a French. I think the sound was a French, and FR behind his registration numbers. On the cow side, she has CH, and that was Swiss. And then you bring in some of the French bulls, and they had French and that. So when you look in the early days when people were breeding, Gallant and Parisian females, and that you'd have a combination of the French and the Swiss genetics, and so a lot of people don't understand or know how the original pedigrees. So after they've been here a year, all you see is the Canadian registration numbers, and they all dropped off. But the original pedigrees had milk records. They had the milk proteins. We knew you could look at. I always liked looking at Beet's pedigree, and you could see where his mother was not a great milk producer, but she had some of the highest butterfat content of any of the cattle that were imported in that. And that was to the Swiss people very important, because they made their Swiss cheese from these original animals, and that's where they went up the mountains and they milked them and they made their Swiss cheese. The German, they were more just milked, and they were a dual purpose breed. So now what we're seeing is, as we've gone along, we're now seeing these Holstein cattle, and they're trying to put beef cattle back over top of them. And actually, we've seen some people, I know there's a couple in Manitoba, have actually started using straight Simmental bulls again with high milk records to get some structure back into their milking herds on that. So Simmental goes back a lot of ways just on the whole production of beef and dairy. And it takes all that to make a final animal to get to market in that. Simmental, when it started, the original board of directors, the founders of the Simmental Association, they were commercial guys for the most part. They had seen how the show ring had set back the other breeds of cattle and that. So one of the mandates that was put into the original bylaws and the constitution of the Simmental Association was that they could not be shown. The Simmental cattle were not meant to be shown. They were not to be shown, and they were going to be performance breed. So the original cattle were never meant to be shown, but over time, I remember Agribition when Lacoma Achilles was brought there. He was such a showstopper that everyone stopped by, and that's what sold basically the Simmental breed, is bulls like that were put on display in Regina, and people came from all over North America basically to have a look at the bull, and they went home and they bought semen because they wanted to put them on their smaller cattle and end up with some sort of a composite that come out of the European cattle that looked like him, and he was just a great specimen of where they wanted to be. They wanted to have these things, but they were never meant to be shown. So they started doing a demonstration thing, and then in 4-H we started showing half-bloods. So what we did is we gradually started showing Simmental, and then it just kind of grew from there. Yeah, no, but the original intent was never to show these cattle, not to have them shown, because they did not want to get caught up in this trends of the show ring, of the whims of the judges. And I went and became involved and worked with Transcon Livestock for a couple of years, and we managed Simmental Charolais sales and became quite familiar with the whole sales management business. And then I had an opportunity to go to the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, CIBC, and as an agrologist, and I worked with Calgary at the time. I traveled the whole province, meeting with producers, meeting with businesses and that. So I gained a lot of information and understood how the whole finance and business sector of the cattle industry, the grains industry worked. And I did that for 13 years. And from that, I guess I gained a lot of, and I never really left the Simmental business. My family was still in it, so I was kind of half involved in it, but not really. So we just kind of grew, and then in 1990, after 13 years with CIBC, I was regional manager of agriculture for CIBC in Alberta, and that came, and we became a. I got the chance to go all the way from Fort Vermilion in northern Alberta to Milk River in southern Alberta. So I was on every kind of farm there was, and saw a lot of different kinds of businesses and that, a lot of different kinds of farms, and a lot of them became pretty good friends over time. And so after that stint there, I was approached to uh, look at the job as with the Canadian Simmental Association as a general manager, as the then current general manager Brian Kitchen was moving to the United States with the American Simmental Association, and he became their executive vice president in the American Simmental Association. So our relationship between the two associations became quite important as we went along, and we just we developed the whole performance North American EPDs in conjunction with out of Cornell, Dr. John Pollock and Dick Quaz, and then we started producing SAR summaries, and it was quite an involved process, and we only ever produced or printed one once a year because it was quite a lot of computer calculations and that sort of thing. And that went on like that for a few years, and I can't remember. I think we might have moved to 2 a year. So now you roll ahead 40 years, and we're now doing they do calculations once a week, I believe, and they post the new numbers all the each week on the animal's papers. So the progress, the information is now at our hands or tips as cattle producers, has been quite a substantial gain as we have moved forward in the whole cattle industry and that. And there's going to be more with DNA now. We've got ways of coding colors. We've got horn polled. So the performance thing, the genetic thing, and we'll keep on moving that forward. So how I got dragged back into the Simmental business. I've been in the city here I've been married 47 years. So all of it's been pretty much in the cattle business. And so our two daughters, oldest one's Carrie and the youngest one's Christy. So Christy goes through she goes to U of C, goes through the Haskayne School of Business, and she's in the oil business, and that's her life in the oil business. Her older daughter, to my chagrin, she takes agriculture in U of A in Edmonton, and I want her to do environmental stuff because I guess there's not a lot of money to be made back in the cattle business. I'm living proof. So anyway, so she ends up working for some chemical companies and that, and she ends up meeting a young guy, Scott Harvey, and they end up getting married. And the Harveys had 3 breeds of cattle. They were always in the Hereford business. They had some Charolais, and they had just kind of started into the Simmental business and that. So they wanted to more concentrate on something, and so they end up in the Simmental business. So they've done a Sim Angus program for the last 15 years, and they're pretty much all black and red cattle now, and have done that. So I've been dragged back in. So I spend my time looking at the numbers. They look at the structure and how the cattle work and perform and that sort of stuff. And Carrie does all the data entry. So I follow the EPDs probably closer than most, and I use them to categorize cattle. I don't get down to the 2% or the 1%, but if you're in quartiles or top 20%, that's when you start looking at and making decisions on how to use bulls, how to use females, and stuff like that. So yeah, the way I'm trying to push them, and if you look at our friends to the south, that they're living really hard on the numbers, especially the Angus people, and some of that's been good or bad or whatever. But we're going to see a lot more. Dairy people are really following the genetics. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that in Canada, and that simply because it's something you can work off of and work on as numbers. And there are ways through genetics now and genomics to to sort out the big thing's been black and red, hetero black, hetero polled, and that. But there's more use, I think, for genomics to come in the coming years, and the ones that follow that the closest, I think, will be at the head of the pack to move forward within. It doesn't matter what breed you're in any group of cattle, but your two main breeds of cattle are going to be Simmental, Angus, and that's just the way it's all going to sort out at the end of the day. And there'll be blacks and reds, mostly blacks, and so that's my belief. And I've sat back and I got no axe in the game most days, but that's just how. And when you look at how they hang up, how they feed, how the carcasses are, how they marble and that. These cattle, they just work so well. And the reason we're in the Sim Angus business and that, and I still have a struggle with that, simply because to me, if you're going to be in the Simmental business, you should be in the Simmental business. But still, a lot of people want to have what they see as maybe a little smaller carcass animal, and put the Angus on them, and having that put into the whole structure of the cattle industry. But it's fine. It's fine. They'll be fine. They'll go forward. But I think we'll see a movement back to a bigger framed animal. People get carried away on big cows eat too much and that, but when you have the packers wanting a 1,500-pound, 1,400-pound steer, you don't get them from 900,000-pound cows. That's just the way we're going to be in the productive areas of this country. In that, in the drier areas, you'll see the smaller kinds of cattle. The smaller frame cattle will be predominant. But yeah, no, we're gonna be kind of an interesting little next 20 years is going to be really quite interesting in that. So I started in the Simmental Association August of 1990 as a general manager. Brian Kitchen was just the general manager at that time. He had left to become the executive at the American Simmental office, but they had just converted. So computers have now taken our life over in the I guess the whole registry business and that, and they had moved away from a room in the Simmental office. A computer that filled the room up was air conditioned, and it ground away, and it got the job done. So they moved off to a new technology, new computer in that, and it took them weeks to get that moved over. John Kish became the general manager, and that was the time I came in at the fieldman spot. And we went through a very big growth period and then a crash in the cattle business. And so John moved on, and so did I. And then Jim Mackay came in, was there through the very first World Simmental Federation show. And then after Jim left, Brian Kitchen became the general manager. And Brian was there for quite a few years, and then he moved to the Simmental business in the States. So that's been kind of the evolution of the management group within the Simmental Association. And then we've had directors all the way from Benton Webster, Dr. Mackay. Yeah, no, we've had a lot of people that have come through the groups and have contributed a lot to this organization. I think that's the basis for where we have and are today in that. Actually, when I first started in the 1990s, what we did is we had a long, by that point in time, we had seen a lot of international people coming and looking at our cattle, and we had exporters. And so we were exporting cattle out of Canada to China, into Kazakhstan, Russia, Mexico, Australia, plus the United States. So we've seen a big demand for and there's really all the full-blood cattle at that time. And we had, one of the big things we had in Canada was our health protocols. So health gave us a big leg up to export these cattle. We had brought them in, we had bred them so they were a little more presentable, and we present them a little better than they came out of Europe and that. So that gave us the breeders here a pretty big boost getting cattle into the international market. So yeah, no, we've seen significant numbers of cattle go out of here to the rest of the world, but that's changed in the last few years, and it's kind of tapered off, and it's not as much. There's not as much genetics. So we got embryos and we got semen, and they trade them as opposed to live cattle anymore. We can go somewhere, we can buy a cow, lease a cow, do some embryo transplant work and move the embryos way quicker than live cattle. And they come on the ground as they're more health orientated to that climate once they get there. Brazil's was a big one where we'd send live cattle down there, and they would really struggle for the first year or two with some of the endemic type diseases, and it took them a while to get their feet back under them and get going in that. So now we can do with embryos and semen and that. So yeah, no, favorite memories. Favorite memories probably was back in the early days, and that is probably after my days as a fieldman, and maybe the days was with Transcon. And so we got to manage the Simmental sales and agribition. And I still remember the days we walked down the rows and rows of Simmental cattle. And the year they had, like I said, the year they had Achilles, Lacoma Achilles on display. Everyone in the barn came to see him. And just to stand back and watch people admire him and then go home and then become involved in the Simmental breed is probably one of the very basic, very starts of the memories of the Simmental breed. The basis for our Simmental breed that's worked so well is the number of people that became involved. They were true cattlemen, they were true breeders, and then what they wanted to do is they wanted nothing but the best. So they became some of our really base breeders and that, and their families. I guess part of me right now is I've moved on to the next generation. Now we see their children and their grandchildren, and they're still involved in the breed, and it's kind of in their blood. So I think we'll see a continuation on. But yeah, the Wilf Davises of the world. I mean, Wilf was a beauty. He just, he saw everybody, he knew everybody. The imported cattle at Bar 5, and everyone. It was kind of like an annual pilgrimage. Everyone went to the Bar 5 sale, and from there grew. Everyone from the United States, across Canada. It didn't matter whether it was Quebec or the Maritimes. They all came to Bar 5, and so we all, at the end, we used to have directors meetings around the Bar 5 sale because it was just easy to get to. And then, from the Wilf and the Drapers and that, they came to the Bar 5 group. And then we saw the Mitchells, and then we saw like Kenny Lewis come along, and Kenny got a big herd, and Lewis Farms became an impactful breeder in that. And so different parts of Canada, you get in central Alberta there, and that's where all the cattle in Canada really are, concentrations in that. And then you came across Saskatchewan, you had Labatt, you had McCarthy, you had Lloyd McIntyre. And Lloyd was a beauty. He just came along, and he was a very strong producer. He just wanted to breed good cattle, and that's what made probably the best for the breed. They weren't about the money. The original price of these bulls they'd sell bulls at $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, and they would get exported in that. The highest priced bull originally was a bull called Pacific. Pacific was sold by the Lacombe Research Station back in the early 60s, 70s probably, and he sold for $100,000. And that was something that was never heard of in those days. And since then, we've just seen the stability of the breed, the growth of the breed continue on, and we've seen the new sire lines, the new genetics, the new breeders that have continued to push the outer limits of marketing bulls, marketing animals, and that, basically building, I guess maybe a structured type marketing plan. So yeah, we've seen a big change in the way our breeders are, but still the basis is the original founders of the breed that wanted to see nothing but the best and raise good cattle. Every spring, and I sit behind a desk all day now, and I look at offering memorandums and lawyer stuff and that. But I tend to go to DLMS right now. So we've seen the whole marketing of the cattle industry change. And then I can sit and work away and turn a bull sale on and listen to breeders from across Canada. But you look at the sales results of all these Simmental sales as we go along, and I'm absolutely amazed at how strong, from start to finish, the demand for these bulls are. The strength of this breed is and always will be in the commercial bull sales. I mean, we can't lose sight of that. These breeders, these cattlemen, and whether they're buying a a Simmental, Sim Angus bull and that, I think we'll see this breed continue to grow. I think we'll see this breed continue to prosper as long as we don't lose focus on what the main goal here, and that is to raise good commercial calves. It's interesting how you want to be remembered, and I think it's just, for me, it was just doing my job as I went along. So the legacy I wanted to be is that I contributed, I made people want to be involved in the Simmental industry. We made the Simmental breed grow, and the next generation. So what I've seen now is, I guess, the legacy we see of people is the next generation coming along. The people we grew up with as young people are now the grandparents, and they're wanting to see their children survive. We started in Simmental business in the late '60s when they were first imported, and we've lived with them and grew with them through all those years. They've always been, for us, the best cattle we could have had. The way they developed, the way they supported the family, to the point where I went through and had the opportunity to go through and work with the association on 2 different occasions, and the last being the general manager. And it was just, what we've seen is the growth of programs, the growth of the breed, the growth of the breeders. And I guess part of the legacy would be is that we have and will be one of the last ones standing for the cattle industry. Simmental will be one of the last couple of breeds that remain, and hopefully we'll be able to contribute to that positioning of breeders, the positioning of the cattle, and our family now is next generation Carrie's raising cattle with her and Scott, and Chick and Gentry and Tell and Olds, and they're just having the time of their life. The kids are growing up in the cattle business. They're showing. So the legacy is where we're going to go, where we're going to be in the next 20 years. I think what we'll see this breed thrive and grow, and be a big part of the cattle industry going forward.